Greetings, adventurers. Welcome back to another Diablo 4 build video. This is of my Thorns Barbarian. I'm going to be showing you this directly on the max roll calculator I used. If you want to view this directly for yourself, I will be posting it in the description below. As well as if you want to see this build in action, you can watch this video right here. It will also be in the description below. But we're going to go through all of the skill tree stuff, and then we're going to move on to Paragon, and then we're going to talk about the actual aspects I was using, along with the hearts at the end. Hopefully, me showing it to you directly will cut down on some run time, make it a lot easier for you to just view this quickly, plug it in, make some changes that you would like to make, and get to playing some Diablo 4. So our basic skill is going to be Flay. I do have 5 points into it because you actually use it a decent amount in this build. Mostly because it gives you vulnerable on the target, and it gives you a bunch of extra thorns and damage reduction. This is a tank build, so both of those are very nice. We have our main spender, well, our only spender, in Rend. We have full points into it, obviously. It's very nice because it applies a bunch of bleed on top of Flay, but it also extends vulnerability whenever you hit with it. And it does extra damage to vulnerable targets, which is always nice. I do have 1 point into pressure point just to have a chance in case my Flay doesn't actually vulnerable them that my Rend does. This is where we get into a little bit of it. We are running triple shout, as you can see over here. We have also run full Thorns talents. This one gives us extra Thorns based on our damage, and even more based on our max life. And then this makes our Thorns bleed, as well as just giving us even more Thorns. This one couples well with the increased maximum life of this talent, and it also couples well with Challenging Shout, which gives us damage reduction, taunts everything in the area, gives us more HP because of this little node, and then gives us even more thorns based on our max life with this. So when you press this button, you're gonna probably around double your thorns. About. We have Rallying Cry, which is our unstoppable for this build. Very important to keep in mind that while the entire duration of Rallying Cry, you will be unstoppable, which at 5 points is going to be around 7 seconds, including this talent that increases the duration. We have it going for max fury generation. We aren't running any fortify in this build, so you can run fortify. There was a version of this build that I created that did have it, but I decided that it was just too many things that I was going for, so I focused on the resource generation. Over here we have Warcry, which is pretty big because we do have some berserking stuff on our gear. Even though this is our only berserk generation, we have a bunch of Paragon stuff that extends berserking and also can give us berserking. So we should have a good, decent uptime on berserking. Not as much as other builds that use it, but it's enough, in my opinion, to justify going some aspects like this one where we have fire around us while berserking. Over here, we took every single thing that buffed our shouts because we're using 3 shouts, might as well. Down here, we only have the bleed stuff. Making it slow is nice because we do have the when you stun an enemy, you deal a bunch of bleed damage. This just gets the stagger bar even faster. It also makes sure that they can't run away from you. Not that most of them try. And then one of the biggest talents is Cut to the Bone, increasing your bleed damage when enemy is vulnerable. We don't actually have a lot of vulnerability damage. As you can see, it's only 55% here. And that's because we only really want the vulnerable for the bleed. This is more of a crit build, because crit synergizes very well with Gushing Wounds. It increases our bleed damage by our crit chance, which is very, very nice, and our crit damage. And then over here we are using all of the Ancients. You could use Wrath of Berserker. In fact, it would probably work better for this build. However, this is not intended to be the most meta of builds. This is what I just like running. I have had a lot of fun with Call of the Ancients. I love calling them in. It's basically like having a channeling shrine, because with this, one of them has a chance to give you 10 fury every time he damages someone. You're basically going to be at full fury when you have this ultimate up, and you can just wail away with your rend. I love that kind of playstyle. I love calling in allies. I guess these are summons, but I love this playstyle. It's more fun for me. Wrath of Berserker is probably better, and that's your decision to make. You can sub in Wrath of Berserker for Call of the Ancients. Then we have some extra healing here. This really doesn't do anything, but healing for 9% of your maximum life every time you spend 100 Fury. It's really good, especially with Call of the Ancients, because you are going to be spending probably like 200 Fury for Call of the Ancients. And then finally, like I said, we have Gushing Wounds. I did misspeak a little bit earlier, that is my bad. But basically, you'll have a chance equal to your crit chance to increase your bleed amount by your crit damage. The overpower is kind of nice. Just have a 3% chance to do AoE, basically. We don't have anything that actually overpowers in our build. You just have that random chance. I have seen it a couple times. It is very nice. But we don't even use Fortified. So it's more of a bonus. I don't think it's really needed to make Gushing Wounds that good. So that's our main talents. Let's move on to Paragon. We are using 5 boards. I usually use 4, but this time I decided to reach out and get this last blood feeder socketed glyph. Start from the beginning. The first one we're using is Seething. It increases our damage while we're wielding a sword, which is mainly what we're going to use because we have the two-handed sword expertise. Not too much else to say about this, it's just really nice. You do get extra Fury Gen for killing people with the sword, with the extra bonus, which is very nice. We always love more Fury Gen. We also have Revenge, since we are running a Thorns build. Increasing the damage that we deal to people that are affected by our Thorns is great. This is one of those glyphs where you only have to get the requirements of 25 willpower, so you don't have to spend too many points on it. As you can see, I didn't grab some of these willpower nodes. In this first board, we have Blood Rage. Like I said earlier, we have things in our Paragon that will give us more berserking, including stuff like over here, which gives us more berserking damage and more berserking duration. We have also, notably on this board, a lot of damage to bleeding enemies, which is going to be every enemy, so it's basically just free damage. Over on board 3, we're using Martial, which is another one of those just get the requirements kind of glyphs. This one will get your shouts up even faster. Your shouts are your main abilities in this build that are on a cooldown, so the faster they get up, the better. And this specific board we're using is Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is another decent bleed buff. Enemies that have been affected by your bleeding for 3 or more seconds take increased damage from you. It is just free damage. It also gives us even more physical damage over time, and also, just as importantly, damage reduction from bleeding enemies. Again, this is a tank build. You are very, very tanky. Uh, when I was doing the Elias dungeon, and you'll see that in the video if you go check it out, the big cannibals that do the frontal slam on you, those were one-shotting my sorcerer, they were half-healthing my necromancer, they were quarter-healthing my barbarian. You do not take a lot of damage with this build, and you heal a bunch because every time you shout, which is this talent, every time you shout, you heal per second, 3% of your HP, and when you spend Fury, you heal. It's probably a little overkill. You could probably get rid of this talent, but I just like making sure that I'm full HP and not going to die to something. We have our 4th out of 5th board with Disembowel. It increases your physical damage over time. Bleed is physical damage over time, and this is a bleed build. So increasing that by 85% is absolutely amazing. It also reduces some of your cooldowns when you kill a bleeding enemy, which is just as important as this glyph over here, because the more your shouts are up, the more fun the build is anyways, and the more resources you get with Rallying Cry, the tankier you are, and more thorns you have with Challenging Shout, and the better duration on your berserking you have with Warcry. We don't actually get this thing. We don't actually get this legendary node. You could. I chose to instead get an extra glyph. You could just ignore this last glyph and go for this. It does have an increased chance to make people vulnerable, but I don't think it's that necessary since Flay makes people vulnerable. Your Rend has a chance to make people vulnerable, and once they are vulnerable, your Rend basically infinitely extends that vulnerability, especially on a boss. So it's not really needed. And then our final board is going to be the Wrathbringer board. By the way, this was Decimator board. Again, you can check this out for yourself. I'll have a link to the build in the description. Our final glyph is Blood Eater. It's 77% increased damage to bleeding enemies. That's basically just a 77% damage increase. So again, they're all going to be bleeding. It also gives you increased critical strike chance to bleeding enemies, which is great, because once again, we are running Gushing Wounds, and that will give us a chance to increase our bleed damage by even more. So that's the Paragon. Let's go over some of the aspects I used. For the defensive, the one that really matters is the damage reduction from bleeding enemies. You're always going to be having bleeding enemies because your thorns bleed them, so even if you're not directly attacking the people around you, you're basically going to have this 20% damage reduction all of the time, as long as there's at least a couple enemies around you. We do have core skills extending the duration of berserking, which is, like I said, pretty nice, because we want as much berserking uptime as possible for multiple reasons. One of them is giving us a absolute ton of thorns. As long as we're berserking, we're gaining between 3,000 to 4,000 thorns, depending on your roll. Basic skills have attack speed. This one you could change out to something else if you would prefer it. I just like getting my thorns up as quickly as possible with the flay stacks. This one, it just compounds. One of those was the right word. The extra damage reduction you get from Flay in general. All the damage reduction you could get with this build is nice. Oh yes, for the chess piece, you could go with the unique that reduces your non-ultimate skills. I am I don't know what I would rather, because extending the duration is nice and you're getting the +4 to your challenging shout and rallying cry. You're about getting the same thorns. It's really personal preference between these two. I would probably go with the non-unique, but hey, if you have the unique, might as well use it unless you have a really good rolled chest. You could always just migrate this aspect to your pants if you really want to. Then on our boots, we have the big one. Direct damage to bleeding enemies has a chance to stun them. That is huge because we are running stunning an enemy deals 80% of the bleed damage. The reason I'm not running, what is it called? Rupture, is because Rupture actually gets rid of your bleed. This, when you stun them, does not get rid of the bleed. You can infinitely stack the bleed. There's a video where a guy got like the biggest damage number in D4. It was something like 12 decillion damage. A lot of zeros by stacking a bunch of bleeds on a target. Granted, you're never going to get that in an actual boss fight because the boss is going to be dead before you actually do that much damage, but that's the reason why I'm not running Rupture in this build. Also, Triple Shout is just so fun, and Call the Ancients is so fun. So on our neck, we are running Thorns damage and have a chance to be AoE. 60% chance is amazing, that's why we have it on our neck, because it counts as basically a two-handed weapon. So your aspects on your neck will be stronger than your aspects on every other gear except for two-handed weapons. Then we're running Shout generates Fury. More Fury generation, more damage. And we have, I already showed you this, but Berserking gives fire damage around you. Damage, damage, damage. You've seen the stunning deals 80% of your bleed damage to a target. I'm also running Berserking, gives you extra bleed damage. How bleed damage works is it basically piles on itself. The same instance of bleed extends the duration of that bleed damage. Different instances of bleed stack on each other. So the more instances of bleed you have, the more bleed damage you're going to do, and the more damage this aspect is going to do. And then finally, I have, this is kind of just thrown in there, but we do spend a lot of fury with this build. So adding the Dust Devils is just free damage. Finally, let's talk about hearts. First off, we're running Ignore Pain. Since this is a tank build and a Thorns build, any damage reduction we can have means that we will be doing more damage to the enemy because we can take damage for longer. So we're running Caged Heart of Ignore Pain. We are also running Caged Heart of the Calculated. This will make us stun targets every 150 to 200 fury we spend. It synergizes perfectly with dealing damage when stunning them. And then finally, for the final heart, we are running Caged Heart of the Revenge. Basically, we absorb some of the damage that comes into us when we press either Rallying Cry or Challenging Shout. It will do an AoE fire damage. Since there's going to be a lot of mobs that are swarming you with this build, since it's a Thorns build, this is free damage reduction and free damage when you're using abilities you're going to use anyways. So that is the full extent of my Bleed Barbarian build. Tell me what you think. I think I did a pretty good job with this. We are running a lot of crit with this build. You can see this all for yourself once again in the description. It will be public. Thank you for watching this video so far. If you enjoyed, make sure you subscribe. My name is Cynic. Signing off. Oh, and like the video. Like the video. Thank you.